No, I need the book, you get the notes. God, this is overwhelming, and I thank you all for being here. This is not at all what I had imagined. So thank you. Just to start quickly with a few thanks. None of us would be here without the faith and courage of Dennis and Elaine from White Pine Press. They were a joy to work with, very easy to work with, and they have been a supporter of mine for a long time. They've published me before, and I mean, to be published by White Pine, I could not have imagined a better way to do this. I think, you know, my thing is I'm happy to be a local hero. I don't want to be a national guy. I don't want to, you know, I mean, I like the regional thing, and I think that that's what Dennis and Elaine have really dedicated themselves to. And I'm just thrilled to be a White Pine, in the White Pine stable, I guess we say. So Dennis and Elaine, thanks. Talking Leaves, John, you know, I mean, beyond just selling my books here tonight, John has been a friend for a long time. He gave me a job when I needed money as a graduate student working in the bookstore, and I spent most of my time reading the books that came in as opposed to doing any actual work. So I thank him for that. Ed at Hallwalls here, just a tremendous response, and thanks for letting me do this here. Just Buffalo, Jeff and Shelley Hirschberg. Jeff and Shelley are there, back there. Thank you very much for your support. They provided also, beyond the moral support, the food is courtesy of Jeff and Shelley. As was mentioned earlier, my brother-in-law Eric supplied all of the wine, and he's an importer, and it's pretty good stuff, you know. I mean, he didn't send up the crappy stuff, you know. I mean, it's like, oh, geez, Eric, thanks, you know. I mean, anyway, and also there is some sushi up there and Thai food from our friend Dow, who just opened a restaurant in Kenmore, Sushi Nagasaki, which is actually, it's fabulous. So if you're interested, it's right on Delaware at West Girard. I have to thank my sisters and my brother for making the effort to come up here. It was supposed to be a surprise. I, of course, was planning to work today and tomorrow, and, you know, so it would have blown the whole thing, and so they had to tell me, but I thank you very, very much for coming up here. It was a long trip. Jerry and Jimmy, of course, the introduction was, you know, more than I deserve, and I thank you for that. Jimmy, as an editor, thank you. Jimmy has a way, if you've worked with her, of making you feel that every single word you've ever written is the best goddamn word that you could have chosen, and so you're just the best thing since sliced freaking bread, and it's just great to work with her. And along with her, Eric Gansworth, who has a wonderful style of editing where he takes the manuscript and throws it up in the air and you know, gathers it back up and says, here, this is the way it should look, you know. Eric put a huge amount of work into helping me with this. I was stuck when I first approached Eric and asked him if he would take a look. He literally did rip it apart. I mean, he spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, and really made me see, I mean, that revise, you know, I mean, revisio, the whole idea of seeing again. Eric helped me to see the manuscript again, and I can't thank him enough for that. And my friend Peter Murphy, who got me started on this whole road. My wife, Barb, for putting up with me. Frankly, fortunately, she's pretty much as weird as I am, so, you know, makes it a little easier, you know. My children, of course, for being perfect. And I would thank their mother as well, Lori Terrell, who has just been, you know, I can't take that much credit. You know, Lori has been wonderful. Our friendship is strong, and I appreciate that. So what I wanted to do is, you know, probably 30 minutes or so with some comments, you know, just sort of What I usually do is find a piece of it and work into it. What I'd rather do tonight is just sort of do an overview, sort of a bit of a flavor from each of the sections, talk a little bit about where all this comes from. So I think one of the things that's interesting for me tonight is that there are a lot of people here who are basically newbies to poetry readings. And it took a lot of courage to come a poetry reading. Oh, Jesus. I've managed to avoid that all this time, but I guess I gotta come. So, just to sort of thank you especially for making the effort. But again, I just want to sort of give a flavor from each of the sections. I think one of the things that I would say that's important here for me is that the work has to work on both the page and in the air, so to speak. It has to, you have to be able to hear it. You have to be able to hear the way that it's written, I suppose, is a way to see it, or to say it. But it has to work on the page. I think that there's been, when I was coming up here through most of this work, was the early throes of feminism. And a lot of that through the 80s was very angry, very, very out there poetry, very emotional. It's here, we're here, and it worked very well orally, but when you got to the page, it lost a lot, and you lost all of that emotion, unless you had the opportunity to hear it, you didn't really get it, So, and then there's the writer, like I was just reading from Billy Collins, the former poet laureate of the country. There was an interview with him, and he's basically saying, I write in silence for silence. I'm thinking about the writer or the reader sitting there reading the stuff. And so he is paying sort of less attention to how it sounds as you read it. I think, when people pick up something like this and they've never read something like this before, they look at it and, this is not meter and rhyme. This is not, I don't do structure, in that sense. I don't do the ABAB or any of the rhyme schemes, any of that kind of stuff. It's called open verse, free verse. This has been the way that a lot of poetry has been written for a long time. It's certainly not the only poetry that gets written. There's a lot of other forms. There's new formalism. There's a lot of people that are working on bringing back form. And, more power to them. I love it, fine, it's not what I do. I think that the best way to understand when you start looking through and flipping through this, there's no poem that's the same as another poem. And I think what's important to me there is if you think of it in terms of how you have conversations with people. When you're talking to somebody and you're really excited and you're really blah, 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 there's a lot of emotion, that's the kind of thing where you would see, where the poem is a solid block, it's really running fast, and that sort of thing. Or if, for example, in some of the poems that I'm writing are at a lakeside and you're sort of coming into a place where you're calming down, you're relaxing. And in that sense, the poems become shorter lines, a couple of lines in a stanza. It's a relaxed sort of thing. So, if you come to it in that sense, I think a lot of people are scared. Oh, I don't get it. I don't understand. Why did they do this? You don't need to know why. There's a way in other words. So it has a lot to do with how these look, is sort of, if you think of it in terms of how the emotion is trying to be conveyed. So, that's what I would say about that. Just give you a sort of an overview. And then to start, Eric actually came up with the great idea of doing a foreword and an afterword, picking one poem in each at the beginning and end that sort of bookmarked the rest of the poems in the collection. Again, something that, I saw instantly when he said that, but had not seen that before. And so the opening section, the foreword, a lot of this is dealing with, as it says, it's dealing with origins, it's dealing with legacies, it's all of that. It's dealing with personal exploration. It's the personal journey. As the book opens, I don't want to set it up as a narrative, It's not, it starts here, it goes through this, it ends here. It's not that way. But, at the beginning of this journey, so to speak, we're looking at a disorientation of the self. Something is lost in familiar place. So in the home, something is lost. And the forward poem is called Presence. Upstairs in the attic of the green house with white cracking trim was finish spaced, I called office, with right locations chosen for books, magazines, and one ashtray metal on the desk, and one of chipped crystal on the end table made of wide-grain pine. On this, swollen by slow, wet air, a line of unconsulted reference books leaned perpetually to the right. Irregularly, I went up here. I believed it was good space to listen and sat at the desk which faced, in any rearrangement, the door. What had startled me was the thief's failing to close the drawers of the desk, which were so easy to close. More than anything I may or may not have missed or lost, it was this flap of unfinished business that threw me, that brought to sharp relief suddenly all the room's marks. Which had I caused? Which were the business of the dead, the here and suddenly gone? And when, days later, I dreamed again, I went up unrelieved and closed them one by one, slowly, as though watching for fingers, puzzling as to whether it would end simply like that, or start up again, or change anything. So the first section moves into how we proceed. The first section deals a lot with romantic love and what about romantic love and how does that have one person and two people and the two shall become one and all that happy stuff. And sort of exploring that notion. We try to keep it on an academic level here. So a lot of the poems in the first section are talking about, again, if this idea of trying to discover, trying to understand what's going on. It's not whether it's good or bad, but again, I think the difficulty with romantic love is this idea that, in fact, there is a separation between the man and the woman. There is always a physical separation. There is always, you cannot become one. Rilke did a lot with this. And I think that that's a lot of what gets talked about here, is if that's true, then what is romantic love? If the two cannot become one in this classic, fantasy that we've all got, then how does this work? And so the first section, I'll read a few from there. 3 movements at first spring. There's 3 stanzas, and within each stanza there are 3 movements. That's why it's called 3 movements at first spring. Anyway, try to keep up with me here. 3 movements at first spring. 1. The door open, not widely so, enough to let this southeasterly air curl in and spin, plains of cigarette smoke hung since early November. They shift like noise shifts in wind shifting its bearing, agitated, calm, then spun. 2. All day, echoes of voices woven through chatter and the longer calls of the birds have been at me, like they do in liars' tales of winter cold. Odd words unfreeze at first spring's air and swirl now, freed, seeking their objects, long since vanished. 3. All day the voices, not constant and intelligent, not that sound a madman madly seeks. It's something that bears hearing, but it's garbled by the wind, like what a lover says in darkness is garbled by her teeth, just as she turns over, resettles in her separate sleep. How we proceed. I have to acknowledge a writing group in the 80s that was just absolutely foundation and formative to me, that included Sherry Robbins and Susan Dix Hannon and Susan Barnes and Mary Rickert. There were 4 women and me, and I had to do an interview to get in, as I recall it. Susan was my champion. Susan Barnes was my champion to get me into this thing. I think that the vote was 3-1, but Susan won anyway. But the writing, I think that I did there, and what I learned from the Weird Sisters, and everything that happened in that writing group, I think was just absolutely key to what I became as a writer, even more so than whatever happened to me at UB, which I couldn't tell you really, frankly, if you asked me. But this is one. Susan was an absolutely dedicated is an absolutely dedicated artist, and one of the people that I had sort of trouble with. The idea of, are you going to dedicate your life to this? Are you going to dedicate your life to this in the sense that you're going to give up your family, you're going to give up whatever it is that you've got around you to be an artist? And that's a scary place to get to, John Logan was another person like that for me, where do you really want to go that far to become an artist, And I think Susan was somebody that really, I worked a lot through a lot of that with her. But we would take just drives every now and then. She would have to get in the car and go. And so, is that you? Oh, Jimmy, okay. Jimmy doesn't have a phone. Anyway, so this is How We Proceed is a poem about one of those trips. Again, thinking in terms of how there is separation, how you each you can be a joint witness to something, but still not be together. How We Proceed. We chose north and drove. Who goes that way these days? Who maps directions mile by mile? It was not to talk specifically or to arrive. It was to go. Everything changed as we turned right and north, the plains of road and vertices, the sun and temperature. The lake stopped us, gray waves curling small and irregular up on this end of one world. Boats hung below or above the horizon. Who can say where it is or was? Or drifted, left to right, port, starboard, red or green. These directions are enough. The beach was stones, flagged by the beige stalks of weeds, drained for the season, and we wandered, breaking through webs and overlays of ice, turning at random, wordless, watching the ways our feet fell and adapted. How we wish our days planned, how we misread Earth's signs. 2 herons stop us. They stand in a shallow inlet, attentive to each other for different reasons. One leaps, and then the other, in slow motion. They loop wide around us, silent, straightening and lengthening as they gather speed and disappear with purpose into the gray above, around, beneath the lake. Gray and gray and gray. How we will descriptions, how we continue. There's a North Country with Loon is a longer sequence of 10 poems. In my view, it's one that I'm most happy about in terms of a longer piece that holds together. I'm just going to read a few of these. But basically the deal is that I'm up in the North Country with the lover, and we're up there for a vacation type thing. So I'm just going to, that sets it up. But again, here's, when you look at this, the first poem here, it's a sort of gliding in. So that's the way that it's written, the visual way that it's written. It's called North Country with Loon 1. Here, it's the loon moves the landscape. The eye across it glides down a wingtip close enough to water's surface to break the tops of ripples moving across toward, settling in a particular circle equidistant from far and near shorelines. 2 glide in, join 20. A third flaps up, is unsettled. Whenever you're out and at anywhere, for the photographers in the room, you're always tempted to grab the camera and take the picture. This one addresses that. 5. Camera loaded, the light near sundown blushes the gray beat wood of the boathouse, flashes along arcs of the waves. Don't photograph this. Don't render it immutable now. Let it distort. Let it unravel, reconstruct itself. This image will retell this here and now for years without conclusion. It will never change. It will always be different. We will never agree. For now, let the light slip down around you. Don't remember this yet. So the second section then moves on into heritage, talks about family and those connections. I think here again, it's a dissociation. It's, the idea that we all have a heritage, but how it's being passed from one generation to the next, I think, is something that I've always been concerned about. It's always been something that I've never felt like that has been given to me to happen. You know what I mean? That if my heritage is to pass on, I'm gonna have to do a hell of a lot of work to figure out what it was, because nobody told me what it was, you know what I mean? Except that I was Irish, first generation, my father's off the boat, so to speak, and that was supposed to mean something, and I don't know what the hell that was supposed to mean, I mean, I'm Irish, I get drunk, I mean. So a lot of that has to do, a lot of this section deals with that sort of passing of the generation, and what is there that's going to go beyond this. Of the father. And so, obviously I had lots of difficulty with my father. Well, not obviously, but I had lots of difficulty with my father. And one of the things, again, in this whole exploration of masculine, feminine, what makes a man, what makes a woman, how do men act, all that kind of stuff. My father was the classic masculine figure where he was silent. He wouldn't say anything about anything. If anybody was going to say anything about heritage or any of that stuff, that would be the woman's job. That's a feminine thing. That's not a masculine thing. And I think that there's a lot of that goes around. But this is one response to that. This is called Of the Father. Do this. Make a statue of him, metal or stone, either one. Have it stand exactly where he stands now, on the front lawn, home at his back, mostly on his right. Petition the town council, get their nod on this. They won't object. Tell them it will demonstrate respect for Americans of stature who were someplace else first. Commission a sculptor, anyone, but traditionally schooled, hard knocked. Have my father frozen exactly as he stands now, in between day and dream. Have the arms folded over the top of the stomach, both hands hidden. Chisel the lips between smile and frown. Make the head as if nodding, as if to people passing. But glaze over the eyes. Don't complicate the thing with passion. To my mother, we don't have that kind of time, but one of the things that I was given by my mother to do basically was kill her if she was in a situation of, on whatever, tubes and blah, blah. It's like, shit, Ma, can we talk about this some other time, But I think, again, the whole idea of the passing of the generation and how we guide our parents to, from here to wherever they go, and what is our responsibility for that, and how do we think about that? So this is called Instruction. It takes an epigraph from a book by Richard Selzer. He's a surgeon who writes just really great stuff about being a surgeon. He's a great essayist. But the epigraph is, pain invents its own language. You will not understand. It may be spring, the utterances of death lost among the loosened trees. Your ear must ignore much. Listen hard for the low moan that will offer a way to me. I will no longer be your mother, nor you my first son in ways we have understood. You may see in dreaming a distant image, my body arched back at the shoulders, curved down the spine in a terrible, graceless reach for passage, caught by the heels in the tangle of some hospital bed you will have been told is necessary, is right. Do not wait. Will you? Will you? Unbind what was me, cut through those useless heels. I will be elegant in spite of that, as I fly, instructed by that awful language. This having to do again with communication, the Mars and Venus thing, I guess you would call it, but I'm not sure who this is, who he is. I think it might be me, but it would be in a later stage, at a later time. This takes an epigraph from a Maxine Kumin poem. The epigraph reads, sundowning, the doctor calls it, the way he loses words when the light fades. It's called sundowning. He might say to her he's lost voice, but it wouldn't then be true if he did. But if he did, he'd add vision, too, that he's lost all periphery of sight, his faith for placing in context that which he sees right in front of him. He fears he'll blurt out the lost words lovers with histories keep covered beneath the frayed patchwork of night's quilt. As they should, he mumbles to her senselessly. Or what if he details the dream of his passing, his literary dying, his release from having to rename in daylight every small thing from which his nights drain all recognition, including himself. But with the light now all but succumbed, and the timber of her question long since absorbed by the blackening trees, he shifts to give her an answer. It's nothing. Nothing is wrong. And like diamonds, these words hang from the strand of her interest, split the last of this light, circle her sculpted dark neck. And then this section closes with another poem about my father and heritage, and this was the intense one. St. Patrick's Day was, you all know what it is. But again, I mean, I think that from the time I was a kid growing up, it was always, it became increasingly irritating to me, I guess, that here I am, a first generation Irishman, and I don't know what the hell these guys are drinking about, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know nothing about this heritage and blah, blah. So, that's where I think a lot of this comes from, and this poem is called It's Patrick's Day Again, and the first line is the title of the poem. It's Patrick's Day again, da, and I've still not got the feel of it. I feel born to a path already roughed out, and my heels dig into it, tear up clumps I twist my ankles on. Did you leave there for some reason close to this? I hear the Patrick's Day chatter of the Isle of Emerald, and I can think only of the pressure suffered in the forming of it. I see photos in coffee table books, green wind, green rocks, black ribbons of wheel tracks mashed into green grasses, and I think of worms turning over each other just beneath the soil line. How could it be otherwise, if not for that churning beneath the grasses suffocate, the soil turns to cracked shale, and the sea cannot take its pound of shore day by day by day. I've not yet got the taste of Irish from the glass after glass I ritually tipped today. What does whatever stained your skin and thickened your back taste like? When you were green, snapped your knees to the gravel, was the blood spread over your tongue spiced with it? When I bleed now, I touch my tongue like whiskey, rare, intoxicating, sometimes sickening. A vision I had that way was waking. We were on the far coast of this country in blinding spray of breaking waves, and you waded in, walked in deeper, rode with your arms. I saw small fingers hook your shoulders near the back of your neck, and in this startling, unfamiliar connection of our skin, I tried not to slip from you, swimming for Ireland. The third section, Flopping Magnetic North. I think, that pretty much describes it. This is where things start to, flop, and things change. And this is where the exploration takes place, different things, art, looking for place, looking for identity, that sort of thing, the disturbance of the sense of self that goes through that. This is actually, there's a lot about art in here. And in some ways it's a lighter section, but still, is looking for that kind of resolution. But through it starts with the disturbance. Synchronization. The sky is the surface of slate, as it has been long enough that I have forgotten to keep track of the day's names. It has grown quieter out in the air and cooler. On days the sun is direct, sounds travel straighter up, expanding to warmer, thinner space, only half heard, but today they are trapped, ricochet down from the close clouds and seem to be clarified and more directionless. Is it Tuesday today? Wednesday? I want not to think away from the weather to chores or move from the exhausted light that drops over me through the kitchen window. looking away north between the sharp edges of two close buildings toward the stiff mud fields of Lockport, I can make out a swatch of far horizon, trees or the rise of a hill squeezed over with gray from the dropped clouds. Closer to me, in the middle distance, is a stand of dark trees whose leaves might color like blood in clear sun. It's probably Tuesday, probably not long into afternoon. This is for my artist friends. There's a couple of those in here. Fact. The earth is flat at 20,000 feet. Only what I've been told, what I've been shown over and over by those who claim to know what's what, makes me think I see it bend at the horizon. 20,000 feet, says the captain, over Ontario, heading across what would be Lake Michigan on our maps, toward the bending edge of as far as I can see. Friends of mine live there at the edges of what I believe to be what. They are hungry there, or so they say, yet they eat so little. They swipe color up in their hands, spread it over their faces, yet they wear black clothes and shoes that are nothing to the weather. They don't tell me they live where they do. That's my fact. When I do not eat, it's for them out at the edge. And when I mismatch my shoes to the forecast, it is in tribute to what I think must be the pain they feel at insight's constant touch. At the edge, and there is one always, just off the charts, I'm certain they know things I only suspect, that this cannot be 29,500 feet, nor that southeastern Chicago, since this plane cannot fly, and that smoke there, looking like clouds obscuring the far edge of my sight, cloaks more than they'll say, less than I want to believe. And then the last I'll read from this section, sort of a whimsical one. I'm a lover of cartoons. So, when my kids grew up, it was like, oh shit, I can't watch cartoons anymore. So anyway, but Disney was that was a favorite thing. I used to always love whenever the cat or whatever it was died, they would, that half-tone clone soul would come out of it and go up to, So here we are. Open-eyed dream in color. My head pounds like I just made love, drunk, tripping on speed, hopped up, unable to come, unable to let go. The insomniac crackle of another cigarette does not soothe. The wafting smoke rising from the dull, hot orange tip does not, like a wand in a Disney cartoon, levitate me magically, does not extract in a pass my pastel soft soul from my ash and harsh flesh-colored, motionless frame. I could see that. My half-tone clone soul sitting up, stepping in short steps up smoke ropes into clouds, lifted by strains of Handel's Messiah, played soft on kazoos. Then, at the gates of wherever my half-tone clone soul, under a magically poised cigarette wand whose smoke comes out sparkling stars, would pause, soul of a Disney cliche, and look back down trembling, unable to go, unable to come back to me. And then the last section, aspects of departure. This is where things are trying now, again, with what I'm not hitting on a lot here is the whole struggle of masculine and feminine, So, but by the time we get here, a lot of that has been going on. This is where the masculine and feminine, I think, in my view, gender, I think, is misunderstood or misstated. There is sex, obviously, male and female, men and women, whatever, the sexual distinction. But then gender, I believe, is much more than people give it credit for. I think that gender, one of the poems I'm not going to read tonight, but in one of the poems I'm talking about gender being fluid. That we move from being masculine and feminine at all times, always. This whole idea that, men need to get in touch with their feminine side, and it's already there. It's not a question of whether or not, and then, we are masculine or feminine to whatever degree in the same way we weigh what we weigh. Like there's a set point, I'm this masculine or I'm this feminine, whatever. But then in every situation that we're in, we become more masculine or more feminine. One of the classic things is, you hand a 6'5" football player a baby, right? And he becomes a woman, he's like, oh God, and the cartoons and, so there's not enough, I think, recognition of the fact that we are all masculine and feminine always, and it's just a movement back and forth. And so, I deal with that. I try to deal with that a lot in the writing. This is one that was focusing on men, but women do appear here. And again, this whole idea of the masculine within the feminine within the masculine, however you want to look at that. Anyway, short description. This is called Body of Men. Amazon warriors are mentioned here. Amazon, when you look at the definitions of Amazon, amasos means without breast. Okay, so the Amazon warriors actually removed a breast so that they could shoot arrows. Basically, the breast was getting in the way, so cut the thing off. So anyway, that's mentioned in here, but that's again this mixture, flopping of masculine, feminine. Body of men. We cannot be released from them. They are not traps. The myths of them mislead. The statue of the thinker is straining, not straining to think. The thought degrades the act, and Atlas, who holds the world up second by second, does not think because to think would be the slip that brings apocalypse. Hippolyta, Amazon leader, and each of her warriors in Scythia cut one breast off in order to draw back and let fly an arrow more smoothly and understand it was not in the name of some thought they cut one breast off. It was to draw back and let fly an arrow more smoothly. Sisyphus, who strains for the rest of time against the rock's weight and the unending rise of the hill, will not be released because he understands his punishment isn't his endless task. His punishment is his endless thought of it. The central sequence in the book is called Points of Departure. For whatever reason, lesbians have always been part of my life. From the time I left home when I was 17, all the way through now, I've always had a mutual attraction. I don't know, we like each other, So that has been a real, not a challenge in the sense, but, sort of a challenge in the sense of my needing to understand what that was about, So at an early age, when I left home at 17, one of my first and closest friends when I got into the Navy was a lesbian, a woman, Barb. And we were very close friends. And I had never met a lesbian before, I didn't know what that was about. I didn't get it, for a long time. But slowly through that whole thing, and then through the years beyond that, I came to understand it. I think some of it comes from my mother, who was not a lesbian, but she was in the first wave of women who left the home to pursue careers, not jobs, but to pursue a career. She was one of the founding members of the Center for Women in Management at the U of L College. She was a past president of BPW, blah, blah, blah. But what that meant and what women were doing when they were entering the workforce was thinking that they were somehow going to feminize the workplace, that they were going to bring what women brought and that would somehow change the workplace. And that was just absolutely wrong. It did not turn out that way, especially in the early years. It was very hard for women to be part of that world, So in any case, I think that's where that sort of, again, the mixture of the masculine and feminine. My mother she wasn't masculine in that sense, but the traits that she needed to get by were masculine traits. And that was to me, the fact that she was my mother and I was her son aside, and it's like, Ma, where the hell's dinner? There was also the consideration that, there's all this other stuff going on. Anyway, a sort of long explanation for the fact that lesbians have been important people to me, and several of them in this book. I talk about several of them, and then as the author's note says, one of the central things that happened to me was my wife Lori coming out as a lesbian after 14 years of marriage and a long exploration together that we went through with that over 5 or 6 years. That was one of the defining things that happened here that brought this. But what I wanted to do tonight was just read two of the early poems about women that I was friends with early. They were really important to me, and I'm going to sidestep the drama tonight. Points of departure, 1B, and then this you'll see that I use initials, which I think even though I didn't have to at this point, I got permission to out these women, you know what I mean? But I think that but what's important is that I had to think about that, and they had to think about that, and even so, I still used the initials, that there's still that kind of, we shouldn't be doing this, I shouldn't have to say B, 1972 to 1970. Anyway. Whether or not she touched, and these are prose poems, by the way. These are longer poems. These are not in the same sense of construction. So these are prose poems. I'm just going to read a few more, and then we'll be done. Whether or not she touched me during those years, or whether I touched her, I don't now recall. Physically, I mean. If we did, it would have been the touch of boys, stage shoves or backslaps, testing the edges of the ability to control. Whatever it could mean to be a lesbian in those years, she was that, at least in our houses and among faces long familiar to us. Otherwise, her straight brown hair flowed loose to her narrow hips, to the tops of her legs, which I know were too short, and I'm certain were too muscular. How could I describe her face other than as handsome? It was all about sex, and it had nothing to do with sex. Physically, I mean. Because we wanted her being a lesbian to mean something real to both of us, we would push at the edges of the constricted military life we had trapped ourselves into and posture all the ways we'd shake them up if she would not have lost so much to a world that could not finally have cared or meant any less. Addicted to pocket change rebellion and hash and speeders and drinking, we waited for whatever a life in the real world would mean, because whatever it would mean, we would be that. Once she tried to ask me something at her apartment with her partner H, watching expectantly. I was vaguely aware of the weight of it in the moment, a point from which we'd change, and only much later did I feel its full press. I did not know. I could not say, though I know I tried hard to get it from her. But the moment broke, and she pushed down whatever they needed of me. Whatever it would have been, I would have been that. I knew somehow that lesbians in such situations trusted boys like me only once, and I knew somehow as well she was astounded we could love. M, 1982 to 1985. And here, this is again in the early 80s, women's movement, so that, they were, language became a very important tool here. So women became W-I-M-M-I-N, not woman, so that man was, get that out of there. So it's women with, W-I-M-M-I-N. Herstories as opposed to histories, that sort of thing, so that's in here. And then as I was talking earlier about the poetry, this is M. She was a blast. I loved M. Sex is art's point of departure. How could I have fathomed that, or fathomed that white suburban vision had undeveloped sight? Splattered down to my sneakers in the swirl of her movement were women unleashed, women studied, herstories, poems with spittle at the corners of the pages, an inconsiderate volume, and a rejection of dance, as I understood it, in favor of movement alone. M mostly laughed at me. In a teacherly way I knew I had coming, especially the day I shared that if I were a woman, I'd be a lesbian. What I thought that meant was that I'd picked up some vague notion, mostly because of her passion, which is also to say her suffering, of how women could truly be moved only by women. And I think I meant I thought that that was better. I'm not sure specifically what it would be better than, just that I thought it would be. Sex is what waters our thoughts, she'd say, which can also mean it extinguishes, an aspect I had been unable to consider. One can overwhelm the other, which meant, I thought I was starting to see, that at any given moment, one must be chosen. Not dance, but movement alone. Not sex, but the water of it, spreading out despite attempts to direct it, resisting or succumbing to any act of shaping. Think of raindrops on a windowsill, she'd say. One drop swirls into another, and from that point forward, both paths are recast. And so, I'd say to her, if I am to fathom this at all, which is also to say grasp, this is the path I should take. And she, spinning out what I still called a dance, would laugh. And then the poem that closes this sequence is for Jay, nobody we know. You affirm for me this fluidity of gender I'm fixed on is overrated. You love, period. All are welcomed who wish welcoming, welcoming what each one shows and hides, breaches sexual and therefore other walls, obviously and nearly irrelevant. We who act as other than as this or that should act, bring the richness of pain, which itself is no more singular than gender and no less a series of inventions. Love, period. And then the poem that closes the book, I want to do two more. The poem that closes the book and one after that. Afterword, here it's the full circle back, and where the foreword, this closes in some ways, and again, the whole idea of bringing this around. But this, in some sense, dreaming appears through a lot of the book, but a John Logan line, I think, that was just gorgeous to me, and I've never forgotten it. Only the dreamer can change the dream. And I think this is where the dreamer tries to change the dream. This is dedicated to Barb, who has been a wonderful, still, happy place for me. As I said, she's as weird as I am, and so, we get along nicely. My family disagrees. She's not as weird as I am. Anyway, the familiar for Barb. Another path can be traveled in the familiar, one that leads in a direction other than contempt, that encircles a place, a geography of hard landmarks, irregular trails known nonetheless so well that each footfall fits with the comfort of ritual or dance. And the path can wind to a small place inside which the body will be draped day to day in such delicate strands of the ordinary that the mind's eye will break on some particular morning its sentry scan of the memorized horizon, its vigilance for what can never happen again, and look away, inward, down, beyond what may or may not appear in the distance, behind or ahead, liberated to see as in a dream, but moving in some way other than as a dreamer alone. And then I want to close for one of my favorite people in the entire world, Midge, who came out here tonight. Just, an extraordinary honor for me to have her come, my once and always grandmother-in-law. This was in the Buffalo News not too long ago, but Midge has had a hell of a life. She was the first nurse in Buffalo that was allowed to keep her job after she was married, and then allowed to keep her job after she got pregnant. I mean, I think you said, well, I'm going to keep working, so, the hell with it. So anyway, she's just, when I first walked into her house, I walked into her kitchen, and up on the top shelf was a little sign that said, "Eschew obfuscation." And I said, now this is a woman I could love, So her husband, Chaz, was a great guy. He died 10 years ago, whatever it was. And this was written for Midge in memory of Charles. This is called Chaz Passes. Chaz dies in his own bed. Midge, his wife, the city's first married nurse, guides his passage. She'd had no question how this would turn out. The beams of the tight Cape Cod house he'd built, a few boards at a time, settled just enough as his shoulders eased down to let go a soft knock, a sigh. Deep January, and we've all had too easy a time of it so far this winter. The hardest came early, braced us for what we were afraid might come, and we all were ready for worse. There must have been Januaries Chaz feared the winds cut through the walls he'd put up, but as he spent pocketfuls of change on handfuls of wood week to week, he must have known without question how it would turn out. No matter how white from cold his fingers would turn, he'd always draft plans to move forward. And always, through the mess of it, the life in the house would proceed. No matter finish work yet to be done, next room to rough in, they would be done as they could be synchronized with the making of lives. Gaining the peace of the master board after board, Chaz took into himself what journeymen don't yet accept. Straight lines are metaphor. Square angles can't be. True vertical is only a notion. He'd smile about that sometimes to himself, thinking a house is most solid if given some leeway to shift. The line of the beam is best laid out to the horizon. A life is well lived that's approximate to how true we thought it would turn out. And I thank you very much again.